Hello, everyone. Hope you're all staying safe at your homes or in your office. Welcome to our bi-weekly webinar Wednesdays. I'm Stephen Phelps. I'm the marketing manager for Acumen. I'm here with my account management team, along with Wayne Austin, who is a stage engineer for Sage Fixed Assets. Today, we'll be going over asset management for Sage 300 and giving you a live demo of Sage Fixed Assets in action. Please note, this webinar is in listen-only mode and should be around 45 minutes long. If we have some time near the end of the presentation, we will answer a few questions, so please use the chat option during that time. With that being said, I will now pass it on to Wayne.
Thank you, Stephen. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. We appreciate your time. Today, I'm going to be covering the full fixed asset lifecycle management, just to give everyone a good understanding of the various cycles or various segments of fixed assets through its life cycle and how that applies to Sage Fixed Assets. I'm going to be covering the various modules within the Sage Fixed Asset solutions, and I'll be spending some time talking about the integration with Sage 300. I'm also going to be able to go into the solution and show you an overview, a high-level demonstration of what those various modules do and how that interacts with Sage 300. So first, let's look at fixed assets complete life cycle and how that applies to the various components of Sage Fixed Assets. Now, depending on your particular business scenario, you may have all or some portions of this as far as your asset management life cycle. Certainly, you will go through an acquisition phase where you're purchasing those fixed assets, and you may be placing them directly in service to start depreciation. In other scenarios, you may be acquiring assets in various components that may have multiple roll-up costs, go through a CIP phase, construction in progress, and then be placed in service later to start depreciation. With Sage Fixed Assets, we do have a planning module that would handle the CIP portion and be able to send those items to be placed in service and start depreciation directly in the depreciation module, avoiding double entry. The next cycle, of course, in your fixed assets is going to be actually calculating depreciation for tax or for GAAP, and our solution works across all verticals. So you could be a standard U.S. company, government, nonprofit, and the hospitality verticals. It's a very flexible and complete solution. The next cycle in your fixed assets, once you've done your calculations for tax or for GAAP, for example, would be actually having the ability to do a fixed asset inventory to make sure you can account for all of the things you do have. And I'll talk a bit more about that a bit later. So we have a tracking module which actually handles that for doing physical inventories. On the reporting side of things, you're certainly going to need to be able to run various reports on the various depreciation expense, for example, journal entry, tax reporting, and so on. The solution has a large number of standard reports built in, but there's also a custom reporting option which will give you the ability to create any type of ad hoc reports that you may need. And certainly the last phase in a fixed asset life cycle is going to be disposals, be it you're selling that piece of equipment off, or you're simply going to retire that piece of equipment because it's fully depreciated and you're simply going to be disposing by abandonment. The depreciation module, again, will handle that portion of it, where you can do disposals or transfers, full or partial, no problem in the solution. So again, to recap, basically the four components of our fixed asset solution is a planning module for before they become a fixed asset, handling things like CIP or various projects that will result in assets being created, depreciation module for doing calculations for depreciation for tax or for GAAP, and the tracking module for doing physical inventory and your custom reporting feature. So let's look a little deeper into some of the capabilities of the planning module. So for example, if you're doing something like a leasehold improvement, or you're a hotel that's replacing your phone system, and you're going to be ordering all of the various components, phone switches, PRI trunks, things like that, and you're going to have a variety of roll-up costs, be it from labor, materials, and the end result is now being able to place that phone system in service later on. This planning module will allow you to capture all of those realized costs that may roll up under a single line item, be able to report against that, against two sets of numbers, which would be an original budget, and you have the ability to create a revised budget so that you can then see where your spend is against both sets of numbers. As shown in the graphic on the right, if you look below project statistics, you will see it's showing my actual spend against both an original as well as a revised budget. Now, this also is going to help you avoid any type of double entry because of the integration between the modules. Once any particular line item is ready to be placed in service, you don't have to wait for the entire project to be complete. You can send individual items to start depreciation in the depreciation module. And that avoids you having to create those assets both in the planning module and later in the depreciation module. You also have the ability while doing this to split a single line item, for example, into multiple assets of equal or different values. The depreciation module, this is really the heart of the solution, where you'll more than likely spend most of your times. This is where you'll be able to take advantage of all of the baked-in tax rules. The solution is updated each year for all of the tax updates. And it does include 52 depreciation methods for calculating depreciation. You also have the ability to create any type of custom depreciation methods that you may need. Now, it has a lot of great tools built in, a lot of great reporting. The asset snapshot on the right, for example, you can run at any point once you're in a company, or even have this displayed when you open a company. And it really just gives you a quick overview of what's going on with all of the assets in the company. And the graphic on the left portion of that, in this particular case, I'm looking at what's placed in service by quarter. So if, for example, you're doing maker's depreciation for tax and you exceed 40% being placed in service in Q4, you would be able to see that information here and easily do a mid-quarter convention switch in the solution. The solution also has a built-in audit advisor. This is actually a very useful tool for those of you doing depreciation for tax. Now, what this will do when you run the audit advisor, it's going to take a look at all of the assets in the company and what you're doing for depreciation for tax. Now, should you have any particular condition going on in that organization that could be a red flag for you to get audited, it's actually going to generate an exception. As you'll see there in red, it's showing that I do have an exception in that particular scenario. It's going to identify what it sees as the issue, and it's also going to identify a resolution. It will even create a group where any assets that are triggering that exception will automatically show up in that group, and you can easily now take the appropriate corrective action. So if you run this, for example, a couple of times throughout the year, at year end, if you've got several issues going on, you would have already had them resolved before you even go to an external auditor, for example. So it's a second set of eyes to make sure you're doing things correctly that comply with IRS rules. Very useful tool. Within the solution, for those of you that would be looking at using this in a multi-user type environment, where you may have multiple companies or legal entities within the solution, and you may need to limit who can access what company, and within the company, what type of actions can they take? Can they take depreciation, set or clear period closes? Can they do disposals? And any variety of things. It does have a multi-layered security built in, so you can actually create different profiles and limit who can do what in the solution. Some of the reports built in, it has really robust reporting for tax and for GAAP. You can actually generate fileable 4562. That would also include the worksheet or schedule that goes along with that. You can also generate a tax expense report, which would be used to reconcile that 4562. You can also generate other tax reports, such as property tax reports, sale of property, or 4797 worksheet. And on the 4797, it actually will break down all of those items on that report into the correct section property. So I will show you that when I actually go into the solution, but it does have really robust reporting built in. The tracking module. This would be used for doing physical inventories of your fixed assets. Now, many companies are doing this, and of course, there's going to be some scenarios with folks that are not doing this. A couple of things to think about as to why you want to do physical inventories. There are some cost implications to the company. So, for example, if you've got some assets that are lost or stolen, we call these ghost assets because you're carrying them on the registry, and they cost you in three ways, right? It's going to be a loss of productivity because that piece of equipment is not in service. You could have a fraud or theft situation going on, which definitely has its own cost implications there. But additionally, these are going to be items that since you are carrying them on the books, you're paying taxes and insurance premiums for. So this is really a three-way cost to your company. So doing physical inventories is extremely important to your bottom line to make sure that you actually have what you should have and that they are, in fact, in service. And this tracking module allows you to do that. It does use the same database as the depreciation module. However, users that are using the tracking module will have no access to book fields and therefore cannot accidentally do anything to impact depreciation. Now, you will be able to conduct these physical inventories using either a traditional handheld scanner or an Android app. So you could use an Android phone or tablet, for example. The users using these devices, such as a scanner or an Android app, do not require a license. So you could have free user license that are using the actual tracking software, but you could have 50 people out going to your various sites doing those physical inventories. So a very flexible solution that's actually going to help you account for all of your fixed assets. Now, as I mentioned, there's really robust reporting built into the solution. So there's quite a few standard reports, which I'll show you in a few minutes. Where the custom reporting comes in, it actually integrates a full version of SAP Crystal Reports, and that gives you the ability to actually create any type of ad hoc report from scratch. So if, for example, you go through all the reports, you wanted to do something that was completely different than any of the standard reports, you've got two options. You can either export that standard report out to Crystal Reports and further customize it, or you can build any type of ad hoc report from scratch. And since it is a fully integrated version of Crystal Reports, it integrates with all the modules, so you can run reports tying the data from any of the modules. And of course, you can do an ODBC connection, for example, to some other data source. You can create formulas and do really quite a bit of custom reporting. Now let's talk about how this integrates with Sage 300. Now, the integration with Sage 300 can easily be configured for you by the folks over at Acumen. They've got lots of experience working with you with Sage 300, and they certainly also have experience working with the fixed asset solution. So should you acquire the Sage fixed asset solution and want that integration created, let me talk about the depth of the things that you can do with that. So for example, your journal entry. Your journal entry for your monthly general ledger posting report, which you can generate in the Sage Fixed Assets depreciation module, that's going to be formatted and pushed out to Sage 300, which during your month-end process will grab that file and actually give you all of the data you need for doing your month-end processing as far as your depreciation expense, debits and credits information go for your journal entry. Now, it will also create assets. So for example, if you're using the accounts payable or the purchase order modules in Sage 300, while doing an accounts payable transaction, you can actually tell it to create assets in the depreciation modules. Now, the relationship from the AP module is a one-to-one, so while doing one accounts payable transaction, I can create a single asset. The relationship with the PO module is a one-to-many. So while doing a single purchase order, I could create many assets simultaneously. And this integration works seamlessly, avoids you having to add assets or create those items in Sage 300 and now having to go into fixed assets and create them separately. You can actually tell it to create them here. The screenshot you're looking at is actually from a visual workflow, which you can actually have set up in Sage 300, and you can even launch the fixed asset depreciation module from here. But while doing any of these type of transactions, it's an easily click through to be able to go through a PO, for example, and tell it how many assets you want created and have those assets automatically created during that PO transaction in Sage 300. Now let's take a few moments and actually go into the Sage Fixed Asset solution so we can look at some of this functionality in action. So I'm going to be starting off in the depreciation module. What you're looking at here is that asset snapshot in my particular company that I shared with you earlier on the slides. And I can actually view quite a bit of information here, and I can view this information by any of the books. So if, for example, you have a different cost basis for tax than you do for book, you can easily switch between the books and it will calculate on the fly. This is also where you can see what's placed in service by quarter. It will even show you a percentage. And if you do need to do a mid-quarter convention switch, I'll show you that in a moment, how easy that is to do. I can also look at things like a quick comparison between acquired value and accumulated depreciation. I can look at my 5-year spend, and I can look at a breakdown of remaining life by percentage. So this may actually help with budgeting when to start looking at replacing some assets that are fully depreciated. Now, the solution has the ability to handle standard fiscal years, alternate reporting periods, such as a 445 or a 13 period. So depending on your specific needs as to which version of the software you would need. The standard version that I'm currently in does not support alternate reporting periods, but the Premier version does. So we would actually do a discovery to identify what your specific needs are to ensure that you are on the right version of the software for your particular needs. Now, when you set this up, you can, of course, have different fiscal years between the companies, and it does support short years in all versions, and you can specify book overrides, for example, how you want adjustments handled, immediate or post-recovery, and so on. Now, this asset list view is very customizable. You can choose what information you're seeing and the order that they're appearing in, and you can easily export from this view directly out to Excel. But let's go into an asset detail so we can talk a little bit about some of the fields that are customizable within the solution. Let's first start with the general information fields. You'll have 28 fields here that are fully customizable. This is where you'll capture things like your GL account info, maybe location info, and certainly things like asset classes. Now, keep in mind that your asset class fields are user defined, so you can define any type of asset class or category you want, and that is actually separate from your property types, which are IRS defined. I will talk about these in a little bit. Because you can customize all of this information, you'll want to think about, well, what do I want to capture? You'll certainly want to capture things like serial numbers, if you've got vehicles, VIN numbers, and so on. Definitely with IT assets, it's a good idea to capture things like serial numbers. All of these fields are customizable. I can rename any of these fields to anything I choose simply by typing in that display name. And I can certainly create my list of accounts, for example, and restrict entry just to avoid typos of someone putting in an incorrect GL account number. But all of these fields are customizable, and you can think of it from the standpoint of what do you want to see in asset details. If you are, for example, our hotel, you've got assets on multiple floors and multiple buildings, maybe at different sites. You'll want to capture as much detail that you can create groups or filters based on that information. So you can just see assets at a particular site if you choose to, or a particular class if you choose to. But this is also important on the reporting side, because when I'm running a report, such as my depreciation expense report, I also have the ability to sort and subtotal by anything I choose. So I could run a report instead of just running it system number 1 through the end. I could, for example, tell it to sort and subtotal by location, and maybe below that by asset class or GL asset account, up to 3 layers deep. So as long as you have that information defined, you can actually use that as a sorting mechanism. So absolutely keep that in mind. The Transactions tab is going to capture things such as disposals and transfer. There's a notes area where you can put in notes about anything you choose, but there's also an Image tab that I can attach any type of images, invoices, receipts, and so on. So let me go to an asset that I actually have some attachments, and you'll see in this particular case, I have an invoice attached. I have an image of the asset attached. And it actually does take multiple file types. So essentially, if you can scan it, take a picture of it, you can attach it. Well, it takes PDFs, JPEGs, PNG, TIFF files, and so on. So it gives you a great amount of flexibility. And this capability, by the way, is good to include in your disaster recovery plan. So should one of your locations get damaged or destroyed, you can easily search for the assets at that location, have all the appropriate paperwork that you can now share with that insurance company to make that process easier. Now, let's talk a little bit about the book fields down below. As I mentioned, property types, these are IRS defined. So all of these fields at the bottom here that I'm circling that are in bold are mandatory fields. So any assets you're adding, be it from an import or even being sent over from Sage 300, you can actually set up templates that will include some of this information. If I send something over from Sage 300 without using a template, this information would not be populated. So for me to be able to start depreciation, I would then need to populate the property type. It will get the value from Sage 300, but I'd certainly need to populate things like my depreciation method and estimated life. However, if I set up templates and I can tell Sage 300 to use those templates, when I send, let's say, a new piece of computer equipment over and I told it to apply a template, it's going to get all of the information that's coming from Sage 300, but based on that property type, it's now going to look at what's in that template, populate your property type, your depreciation method, and lives for all of the books. No further action needed for that item to start depreciating. So absolutely remember to take advantage of setting up templates, and the folks again at Acumen can help you with setting all of that up. For those of you doing bonus depreciation, we have a lot of built-in resources to help you with tax depreciation in general. So if, for example, I have some assets where I'm only taking 50% bonus, but based on that being placed in service after the TCJA was enacted in 2017, September 28th, anything placed in service after that can actually take 100% bonus depreciation. All of those rules are built in, but you also have the ability to manually make changes. So if, for example, I want to change my bonus percentage, I can do that across any group of assets. I can do that on the fly. So it gives you a lot of flexibility with making changes after the fact. There's also a bulk edit tool that I can easily make changes en masse to depreciation methods or estimated life. So if after I place assets in service, I need to come back in and take advantage of, let's say, some of the tax extenders, I can come in, select which books I want to make the changes to, and I can actually change depreciation method from anything to something else and or estimated life. So it gives you a lot of flexibility. And there are some really great tools that I mentioned built in. You even have a quick reference to things like what are the latest tax rule changes. If you go to help, what's new and learn more, let's say I'm an organization that's taken advantage of the Section 179 deduction, and I can easily click and look at any particular year, and that you can see here it was increased by 20,000 from 2018 to fiscal 2019. For 2020, it's going to increase another 20,000. So we do have a quick reference here, saves you having to go out to the IRS website, and you can look up information as far as what's in the current version tax rule changes. And the version I'm using here, which came out in January, we do our tax updates in January. All of the changes to the Further Consolidated Appropriations Act are included in this release, and all of the tax extenders tied to that. So a great quick reference resource. Now, as I mentioned, for those of you doing maker's depreciation for tax, if you do exceed 40% plays and service in Q4, you can actually do a mid-quarter convention switch very easily in the solution. You can switch from half year to mid-quarter as a global change for my tax book for whichever fiscal I need to, and it makes that process very easy. Okay. Now, as I mentioned, the Audit Advisor tool is a great tool to take advantage of. So let me actually run that for my tax book, and I'm going to run that for a prior fiscal year end where I know that I do have some issues actually going on in this particular company. It is going to look at all of the assets, what I'm doing for that fiscal year, and it's going to generate exceptions for anything that it sees I'm doing that is a potential red flag. So as you can see here, it's actually found a couple of exceptions. So it will not fail on the first error. It will actually look at all the assets throughout the organization. Now you'll see here, it's actually going to give me a description of what it sees wrong, what is the issue. In my case here, it's telling me that I'm exceeding the $1 million limit for fiscal 2018. It's also recommending a resolution and telling me specifically what I'm doing wrong. In this scenario, the limit is $1 million for that fiscal, and I'm taking $5,675,000. And it will also create a group. This will be the group name. So all I would need to do at this point is go back to my asset list view. I can go to that group and see all of the assets that are triggering that particular exception. If I go into them individually, you'll see on this one, I'm taking $675,000, so that's less than the $1 million. On the others, I'm taking $700,000. And combined, these all exceed significantly the limit for that fiscal year. So that Audit Advisor really helps keep you on the straight and narrow, and it's a really good tool to just run that periodically throughout the year to make sure you're doing everything the way you should be doing it. Now, for most of you, of course, you would be adding assets from Sage 300, but you certainly can come in, add an asset, and even use a template so you don't have to populate all of this manually. I can easily come in and select a new computer template, for example, where it's populating GL account info, basic description, asset class, property type for all of my books, depreciation methods, and estimated lives. So literally the only thing I would need to do is give it an actual acquisition date, a place and service date, and a value, and I can push that out across all the books, and I'm done. So it really makes that process pretty easy. And if I got multiple assets in, I can actually tell it to replicate it. You know, if I got 10 computers, I can do the first one and say, make 9 copies of this. There's my 10 computers. But for most of you, since you are using Sage 300, you'll be creating assets from inside of Sage 100 from the accounts payable or purchase order modules. But I just wanted to show you the ease of adding assets from within the solution. Now, let's talk about some of the reporting features that's going to be important to you. Now, as I mentioned, there's quite a few standard reports built into the solution. And I'll go ahead and run the 4562 as an example. I'm going to run it for my fiscal 2019. And this form does, in fact, get updated for each tax year. So you will have the correct fiscal year form. And as you can see here, I have an actual fileable 4562 where I'm going to have both pages available. And I also have the schedule that goes along with that, showing all of my details. And as I mentioned, it does include a tax expense report. So if you are doing 168 or Section 179, this is also a quick way of seeing what your allowances so far are for the year. So you can run this at any point. It's a quick way of checking to see if you've exceeded, for example, the Section 179 limits, because that also gets captured here. And if you'll take a look at that, this is actually a great report to use to reconcile that 4562, and it will have your totals on the last page. Sale of property, the 4797 is another important report you'll need for tax. I'm going to run that for my fiscal 2019 as well. And this report actually will break everything down by the correct section property. So you can see here my 1245, 1250 property. The ordinary gain losses will actually be on page 2. And this should be everything you need for that 4797. Ordinary gain losses. All the reports, by the way, in the solution are exportable to multiple formats. You can push them out to Crystal Reports, PDF, CSV files, standard Excel, Excel data only, and so on. So there's many export options. Now, for those of you that are already using Sage 300, from a GAAP side of things, you're going to need to be able to run this journal entry and get this data here. Sure, you can actually run this manually here if you want to run the report, but for those of you using Sage 300, you're actually going to have the link that you will actually use for that. But here is the actual general ledger posting report, all of your debits and credits. And in your world, you're simply going to run the Sage 300 link. You can actually configure that as your favorite, and this will actually give you a dialog. It's going to have you close the company, and you'll simply populate which company, if you have multiple companies, and you're going to do this for all your assets or any subset you choose, and you simply populate your actual period posting date. Let me go ahead and populate mine. And simply increment that up each month. If you're using a reference number, you can do that, and you can actually preview the report, and this is the data that would actually get sent out for Sage 300, so you don't have to run it manually. So once you've previewed it, you hit post, and it's going to actually place that file out for Sage 300 to retrieve it during your month-end process. So it makes that process pretty easy. Go back into my company. You'll certainly need other reports, such as possibly a property tax report. And because you can create various groups, if you're operating in multiple states, for example, you can actually run this for any subset of assets. Let's say based on tax jurisdiction, you can create groups based on that. You can actually point it to a particular field that you might be using for identifying property tax category and run that property tax report on just that subset of assets, and this should give you everything that you need for being able to do that property tax report. Make this a bit bigger here. So you can see in my case, it is breaking down my correct section, my correct property tax categories, and my acquisition year end and source report accordingly. Now, if you do need to run, of course, some standard things like a depreciation expense report, let me actually go ahead and run this one. And you can choose which book you want to actually run the report for. But this is one that will actually show you what your prior depreciation through date is, your current depreciation through date, and your depreciation, this run information. And this is probably one that you might typically sort. I just ran this unsorted for our purposes here, so it's simply going to show it system number 1 to the end, but I could tell it to sort and subtotal by location, asset class, GL account, any combination I need up to 3 layers deep. And if you do take a look at the column details here, you'll see it is going to capture the prior depreciation through date, the current depreciation through date, and therefore looking at mine, my depreciation this run is reflecting 1 month's depreciation. Okay, and it will have your totals on the last page. And as I stated, if you do need to sort any of these reports in some way, you can simply go to Format Reports, choose how you want it sorted, and you can do this up to 3 layers deep, and you can actually save that as a custom report so that the next time you have to run that report, you have that version available. You can create as many customized reports as you choose. So if you look at my report list, you'll see here my depreciation expense report with a white notebook symbol next to it is the standard version. All of these you see in yellow, I changed something and saved it as a custom report. Now, additionally, you will have the ability to not just change the sort order, but you can click here in the custom reporting option where you can add or remove columns of data. So in this particular one, I've added an additional column, current net book value. That's not normally in that depreciation expense report. Told it to give me a summation at the end and change the orientation, and I can even modify header and footer information for this report. But you have access to any of the fields. You can add or remove different columns of data and really tweak these reports quite a bit. Now, if you do need to create something from scratch, I can actually create a brand new crystal reports ad hoc from scratch, save it wherever I like to, and then of course come back and reopen that report, have it refresh the data because your data may have changed, and you can literally build anything you want to, include graphs, calculations, anything you can imagine. It does give you full access to every field in the database, so I can literally pull any data from any of the modules. I can even, of course, include formulas and so on. So for those of you with advanced reporting needs, you can certainly do that. But by far, probably 99% of what you need can be done by adding or removing columns of data within the application, as well as modifying the sort order. But for those advanced users, we do have the ability for you to create any type of reports that you want. For those of you handling both tax and GAAP, where you may have scenarios that you could have some type of temporary differences between tax and book, you can run this report, which will actually show you that information. So there is a report that will show differences between tax and book, and of course other standard reports like net book value and so on. So this report will show you that information, any temporary differences and reversal of those differences. So if you do have different cost basis between tax and book, there is a report that you can run for picking up that type of information. Most people will need some type of roll forward report. There's actually a fixed asset summary report, which will capture your beginning cost, ending cost data. And again, as I stated earlier, all of these reports are exportable to multiple formats. So you could certainly export them to Excel, merge all the data, and do anything else that you need. This is the fixed asset summary report, which some folks refer to as a roll forward report, but will capture things like your beginning cost data, ending cost data, prior accumulated, and your total accumulated depreciation, and will give you your totals on the very end. There are projection reports that you can look at future year depreciation, either for a full fiscal annual, or you can certainly look at this in a more granular fashion by looking at just one fiscal as opposed to multiple, and actually be able to see the monthly period expense and year to date, and you can actually even drill down and look at the individual details for that. So really robust reporting. So let me take a few minutes and talk about the other side of this, where you can look at doing CIP, projects, various sorts, need to be able to send things to be placed in service here. And before I go into that module, I want to show you how things will arrive. Each of these groups you see here was created by something sent from the planning module. So if I sent 1 or 100 items from the planning module at that date and time, it's going to show up in a group. And because the planning module also has access to any of the templates I created, when I send something from the planning module, I can bring any information I want to the general information fields, as well as my acquisition value, place and service date. The rest of the information you're seeing, depreciation methods and life for all of the books, are coming from the template. So when I do send them something over, again, if I use a template just like I would from sending something over from my PO module in Sage 300, by using that template, I don't have to touch it. It's ready to start depreciation. So keep that in mind. So let's take a quick look at the planning module and talk about how this can work with some of your ongoing projects that you may have. And this could be any type of projects from software development, rolling out a new phone system, doing some leasehold improvement, renovating a hotel, whatever the case may be, any type of project. This is the graphic I showed you earlier on the slide, where I can see my actual spend against both an original as well as a revised budget. I can see what's spent or unspent of the project capital, what's capitalized and what's expense, and so on. So when you set up a project, you'll start with some approved amount or some budgeted amount, but as things change, as they almost always do, instead of having to erase that original budget you set, you can simply come in and create a revised budget, because someone always wants to know, hey, how badly did we bust the original budget? And you can, of course, populate other project information. If you look at the hierarchy of this, each of these individual line items are what's actually going to become a fixed asset. If I go into one of the details, you'll have some fields here that can be customized to capture whatever type of information you want. Each line item will have their own budget as well as the availability of a revised budget. And this is where all of your roll-up costs coming from purchase orders, invoices, labor, materials, whatever the case may be, and your sum total of this spend is what's being measured against your budget or revised budget for this asset. Now, once spending is complete, this is where I can tell it spending is complete, set a completion date, even set a place and service date, tell it which template I want applied, and I can even split this into multiple assets of equal or different values. I'll actually go to one that's not been sent over to demonstrate that. I can simply come in here and say, hey, I want to split this line item to multiple assets, give them a value, or I can tell it to make them of equal value. I can see all of the templates that I've created in the depreciation module. Okay. And I can now easily place these in service at any point. So any line item that I've actually flipped the switch on the asset information tab and I've changed this from no to yes, spending is complete, it makes that line item available to be placed in service. Anything with a status of C like Charlie means spending is complete. S like Sam, it's already been sent to start depreciation, and A simply still an active line item. To create assets, I simply go up to line items and tell it, yes, I actually want to create assets. It will show me everything that I've flagged as spending is complete. It will show me how many assets will be created from each. And if I'm using a template, it will show that here as well. And I can select any company. I can send either a couple of them by using the Control key or Shift key, or I can select all and create, many assets at once. And once I hit create, those assets get created in the depreciation module. And if you use a template, it's going to be ready to start depreciation with no further action needed. Now, of course, for projects, you always need to be able to do some reporting on this. And I'm just going to show a couple of quick examples. You can look at a consolidated report looking at multiple projects, or you can look at individual reports. And in the case of this consolidated report, I can actually view this in detail or subtotals only against either my original or my revised budget. And I can actually run this report and now get a quick glance in subtotals as to where my spend is against budget. So in this case, my project 1 and project 2 are under budget, my project 3 is over budget, but I can easily drill into the details and see the individual line items. In this case, this line item is 69 grand over, this one is 78.48 over. So overall, I do have some items that are over budget, even though overall my project is under budget. And again, all the reports here are exportable. You also do have custom reporting available here, where I can create any type of ad hoc report that I may need. But overall, this gives you a really great ability to manage any type of projects going through CIP that needs to result in assets being created, and for you to be able to do some great reporting on that. So now I'm going to do just a brief high level of the tracking module, in which scenario you'll be able to use either a traditional scanner or an Android app. We do not currently have Apple iOS available, that is still in development, but using one of these apps, you can, the Android app, you can easily go out, scan those barcodes, update any information that's changed, even take a picture and attach it to the asset, and be able to send that data back to the tracking module. For asset tagging, you can actually generate barcodes within the system, or you can pre-order barcodes of various types that will correspond to an asset ID number. That asset ID number is what actually appears in the asset ID field and the asset details, so you can easily know which particular asset you're looking at while doing that inventory process. Now, an important thing I do want to point out in this module is that this is typically not going to be someone from accounting that's doing this. So one of the big concerns you'll have is you don't want anyone that's just doing inventories to accidentally do anything to impact depreciation. So if you notice, there's no access to the book fields here, just general information fields. And in addition to the 28 you have in the depreciation side, it adds an additional 12 fields that they can actually capture any type of other information that's not of interest to the accounting side. Any images you have attached, they're all going to be here as well, invoices and so on, because this actually is using the same database. So you would then be able to create any type of groups you want to, push an inventory list out to multiple devices, be able to have someone go off-site, do that inventory, and be able to send that data back. For those of you on the accounting side, what's going to be important to you about that is being able to get a reconciliation report. I'm just going to run this one for the last inventory I did, which is going to identify what are your assets that are missing. So if you take a look at this reconciliation report from my last inventory I did, it's going to show you the tag number, what it is, status of N, or assets that are not found. These would be your ghost assets that are, having some significant cost to your business. They're either lost or stolen or otherwise unusable, and no one has an idea where they are, but you're paying taxes and insurance for them. So identifying this by doing physical inventory is extremely important. Of course, the status of O is anything with no changes or anything you made changes to a status of C. But the important thing for accounting is knowing, hey, what's missing so I can actually do a proper disposal and capture that gain-loss calculation. Okay. So that's essentially how that tracking module works. We talked a bit about the planning module and how that works. I just want to go back into the depreciation module just for a quick moment to show you the disposal report, because once you've completed that inventory and now you've identified some things that needs to be disposed of course, you need to be able to see a good disposal report that identifies that. You can run that disposal report for any date range you choose. And this is going to capture all of the realized gain-loss calculations tied to any disposal, be it full or partial. And there's actually a really good disposal report. You can run it for any date range you want, a month, a week, a year, and so on. And you'll see here, it's going to show you the system number, asset ID number, what it is, your in-service date, your disposal date, your value, acquired value. So if I've done a full disposal, it'd be the full acquired value. If I've done a partial disposal, would be the value of what I actually disposed, your net proceeds, and your realized gain loss information, and anything that may have been deferred or not recognized. So pretty robust reporting again, so it takes you full circle so you can accurately manage your fixed assets and capture any appropriate information you need in these reports. So let me go ahead and pause at this point and see if there are any questions coming in the chat.